Hello and welcome to today's edition of the channel, this channel which I've created to discuss my books, The Dichotic Dilemma, The Fabric of Life. My name is Raleigh Chiuta, and ultimately the purpose of this channel is to fulfill on my ambition to create an open constructive dialogue on the matters pertaining to the human condition as we experience it, and of course work for a better future. It's quite a lot I want to talk about today, but in many ways I want to carry on from where I left off in the last few editions, particularly discussing the gentleman, George Murray. And I forgot to say in my last video, and I felt I wanted to say it today. For those being influenced by the likes of George Murray and his divisive, derisive worldview, don't let these people rob you of your humanity. Because of course, on the surface, it seems we do have our differences, culture, religion, language, beliefs. But ultimately, we are just but one human species, and it's this idea and this ideal that drives me. And of course, the challenge is, how do you make that an existential reality? And I suppose that is the question of the fundamental question of the human condition itself. Having said that, going on from that, I wanted to carry on from, as I said, where I left off discussing George Murray, and also mention John Cleese and his tweet that London is not part of England anymore. Of course, he sent that tweet whilst he himself was situated in the Caribbean. And this speaks to the mindset of superiority, of separation, of entitlement that I seek to challenge. And the self-delusion that someone who is in someone else's country and feels entitled in that he has the right to seize wrong of someone else being in his so-called country. This, of course, is the dichotic dilemma. And how do you speak to a mindset that is so inclined? The philosophies of the past centuries of separation, of superiority, of dominance, have followed us into the present day, as evidenced by these two gentlemen I'm referencing in this example. But as I say, my intellectual and spiritual mission is to challenge this view of separation in a way that informs us to live a better existence on this planet. we seem to be moving backwards in many ways. We, of course, had as a fight for human rights in the last century, particularly from my perspective as a black person, the civil rights movement leaders such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Mandela, and generally speaking, the wars against fascism and the end in many ways of the colonial empires which were designed and operated based on the overt exploitation of others. And one would have thought that humanity is moving forward in some way as a collective. But it is fair to say that the warning signs are quite strong at this present day, that perhaps we might be sliding backwards. This obviously is a cause for alarm, and also in many ways a call to action. And I sometimes try and draw a parallel between technological progress and say perhaps if social progress matched the pace and the incremental, exponential improvement of technology, what human societies could we create? We live in an era of this present day championed quite fantastically by the bellicose and confident Donald Trump, as he calls his political opponents monsters and communists. And even in our own country here in the United Kingdom, you have Boris Johnson declaring that we, the Conservatives, won the war against socialism, as though we are going back to the days of McCarthyism, and is clearly an ideological war. I tend to be someone who wants to go into the middle of all of this and bring it all together. Because, of course, socialism, communism, capitalism, etc., these are just but ideas. Really, the devil, if I can use such a word, is in how they are implemented. And of course, to claim that one holds an ultimate moral superiority over the others is in itself a fallacy. So the work of the book, my work, I feel, is to be a bridge between disparate and discordant points of views. Indeed, the Dichotic Dilemma. I've recently become acquainted, as I was a generally Labour voter here in the United Kingdom. I did support Jeremy Corbyn based on his humanitarian record, in my opinion, which will be looked on favorably historically as a man who stood for predominantly the right things. But of course, the capitalists and in many ways imperialists were worried by his brand of politics, which I can understand. And being someone who doesn't say that they are bound to a political identity such as socialism, capitalism, etc., I could see their concerns because, of course, this is Britain, and Britain is built upon certain beliefs which brought it to where it is today. And those who wish to hold on and even uphold those beliefs would have every right to be threatened by Mr. Corbyn. But I have spent looking for a new political home, as it were. I have become acquainted with the socialist parties and what in the Socialist Party here in the United Kingdom, and what I've become abundantly aware of is the undoubted humanitarian ethos and the central concern of socialists being the welfare of others. How this can be seen as something to fight, something to fear. Just recently, the Socialist Party in Greece have brought down the Golden Dawn, and which are a racist political organization in Greece, and they managed to get the Golden Dawn to be at least banned or at least made illegal as an extremist group. And socialists throughout the civil rights movement fought for the rights of blacks and the rights of immigrants, and they still do to this day, and confront fascism head on. Yet, if you listen to the right wing of the political persuasion and how they will speak of socialists, you would think that socialists are the devil incarnate, particularly as the champion of the right wing at the moment, Donald Trump, would have you believe. This, of course, for me, is just a clear evidence of the phenomenon of the dichotic dilemma. Socialists believe that capitalism needs racism to thrive. And in many ways, it's an idea that's I'm still getting my head around. But you can certainly see how the capitalist complex of slavery needed to create the idea of racial inferiority so that the exploitation of blacks could be seen as morally acceptable. And of course, the exploitation of Africa colonially, and indeed the economic ongoing exploitation of Africa. Because, of course, on one hand, the Western intellectual class will see itself as being the champion of all the greatest things that represent what humanity is. High intellect, high moral caliber. And of course, this is where we start to get into the realm of the ideas of white supremacy, etc. And this is evidenced in many ways by video that I did happen to come across on YouTube, which is an amazing institution in itself, if left in its current form. And it spoke about, the gentleman was a scholar speaking about the fact that African sailors actually discovered the Americas, as it were, pre-Christopher Columbus. But this idea rejected wholesale by the Eurocentric scholarly elite. Of course, myself being a Zimbabwean, we do have famous ruins called the Great Zimbabwe, which are stone structures erected without any cement or mortar and have stayed in place for hundreds of years. And the European colonialists wouldn't accept or believe that such a thing could have been done by Black people. This, of course, is what we talk about when we say the curriculum needs to be decolonized. Because, of course, this Eurocentric view where the intellectual or even human potential of others, of course, those of the darker complexions, of course, at the end of the spectrum, being blacks, is diminished. Then, of course, the institutions and structures that keep the oppressive system and the oppressive state, and even the mental oppression of blacks, who I tend to focus on because, of course, I'm a black man, so I have to fight for my own liberation. This will continue ongoingly. And that's why I have, even up to this point, am still mentioning George Murray and John Cleese, even though I've made 2 videos on them, because this, for me, represents the reprehensible manifestation of the notion of white supremacy, obviously veiled in the cloak of nationalism and love for country and all these other euphemistic phenomena that we see in the present day, because, of course, those of such strong opinions feel as though they have been hamstrung by the advent of political correctness. So ultimately, the only way that we challenge and perhaps leave consigned to history these nefarious views is if we allow the people who hold these views to speak freely and be challenged by the likes of me and the likes of those who hold an alternative view. And if we fail, then that will be the fate of our current period of history, of time space. Because, of course, other great thinkers, such as Martin Luther King, have come and carried on the fight to unfortunate consequence for him personally. But the conversation needs to carry on. And as the supremacists become more emboldened, it becomes more important to engage them in dialogue. In many ways, this is what this is all about for me. And what has become clearly apparent to me is the infinite wonder of the phenomena of human existence. So, to the extent that we live in the world that we live in, of injustice in some ways, because of course one mustn't just focus on the negative things, but this is what I am challenging, to try and reconcile the two extremes of a truly infinite and unbelievably magnificent universe, as opposed to the more limited aspects of the human condition. It is a truly remarkable juxtaposition. And I tend to want to believe, call it idealism, that that bridge is something we can at least attempt to close by perhaps appealing to and becoming greater in what we are relative to the truly magnificent wonder of the universe. So, in many ways, that's the preamble today. And yes, we do have significant challenges, and it stands to reason that the best way that we overcome them is, of course, together. And that is the central thesis, the central assumption of my philosophical thinking. Because, of course, it's one thing to hold philosophical ideas, it's quite another thing to have them be manifest in reality. And indeed, of course, that's the dichotic dilemma. So I will read on. Ignorance is the gift of malevolence. And for those who perhaps will be watching this as the first clip, my book is The Dichotic Dilemma. In my early years, I became quite an deep thinker, challenged by the presentation of human existence in a post-colonial African Zimbabwe, which had the heritage and the history of colonialism in terms of the racial divide, and of course the legacy as well of economic divide as a result of the colonial project on a racial basis. And this is something that made me have to ponder life in a fundamental way. And in my early 20s, late teenage years, this became quite a intrusive and all-consuming phenomenon. And I had to understand the necessity in many ways of human suffering, and as a represented or as manifest through the world, the way in which the world works. And of course, I had to understand European imperialism and understand why such a fate had to befall, particularly in many ways, the Black continent, because I am a Black African after all. But of course, human suffering is across the board. And of course, life is on many levels: personal, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and of course, on the macro level of governments and the more all-encompassing world that we live in. And so the dichotic dilemma becomes an aggregation of all those ideas, all that thinking. And what first came out was poems, and then those poems I later evaluate one by one through the book, and that's what becomes the book. So that's the general synopsis of what the book is and what the book is about, and what leads me to be in front of the computer at this point talking about it. So of course, ignorance. So this would have been a poem, and then there'll be a small extract after that, which discusses maybe the deeper meaning of the poem, which I will be extrapolating from the poem. So ignorance is the gift of malevolence, for it blinds you such that you cannot even see the shackles that bind your hands and feet. It restricts your movement such that you only move in the direction that those who wish to oppress you want you to, and you are happy. Blissful oblivion. There's no bliss in such a wretched curse. And just as I read that, it reminds me of one of the colonial sort of like realizations, was that if you fight and try and physically oppress people, which was done as well, they will fight back. But if you teach them of their inferiority and tell them that they should only go to the back of the bus and that they are lesser than you as a person, as a human being, they are of intrinsically less value, they are intellectually inferior, their IQs are per capita lower, they are of course the lowest strata of existence. You won't need to put them in shackles. They will of course do that themselves. They will go to the back of the bus themselves. They will go to the colored only themselves. You won't need to tell them. And of course, this is so this right now in this moment is what this poem tells me, that the ignorance of being told you are less than a whole person is truly a curse. But at that point in time, this is what I wrote. I grew up in Africa, and in my youth, I was heavily politicized by virtue of the presentation of the world I was seeing, which frustrated me greatly, due to the economic and social imbalance and division, primarily along racial lines, which occluded my perception of other variables. Zimbabwe, like many other English colonies, is a Christian country, so the influence of biblical thinking and tone will be evident in the expressions I am attempting to understand. Yet now I think and observe from a different perspective. Consequently, Some of the poems will have strong racial and religious overtones, which surprise even me as I read back on them and type, looking to offer clarity to an emotionally heightened state of perception. In many ways, the lesson is the reiteration of the point that perspective creates opinion, and understanding, contrasting perspectives breeds understanding between seemingly disparate points of view. That clarified, from this poem, I'll just focus on the point it raises with regards to ignorance. As I have mentioned, perception and opinion is a function of perspective. That put together, ignorance becomes a function of erroneous perspective and perception, and the ramifications of ignorance can cause dire consequences in the human social sphere. Consequently, understanding extremes and extremes of perceived ignorance is a vehicle to understanding disparity, the dichotic dilemma in creating balance in the human social sphere. So it's a revelation for me as I read back, because it's a long time ago that I wrote the books. So, but what I can see is that it's a continuation of intellectual exercise, and the learning never stops. But what is clear is that the ultimate drive has always been the same, and the ultimate realization has always been the same, which is the fundamental concepts of balance. And in Oriental philosophy, they of course have the concept of yin and yang, and in many ways, this is probably what I was slowly realizing and learning. Because, of course, the book discusses a lot of politics and social dynamics, but there's also ultimately an overarching spiritual observation of human existence. So anyway, I'll end the video there today, and hope you enjoyed, and hope my rambling is is incessant, I know, but it's not off-putting. So have a great day. Please like, share, and subscribe, and look out for the next video. Thank you.